Well, my full name is Dom, or Dominic Cortese. I served on the Board of Supervisors from 1969. I was actually elected in 68 through 1980. I was elected, first elected in 1968. My first term, of course, began in 1969, and I was on the board for 12 years, from 1969 through 1980. In 1980, I was elected to the state legislature. The district was not just East San Jose. The district encompassed East San Jose over to the boundaries of Berryessa out in the Piedmont Road, Penitentiary Creek area, over to Highway 17, downtown San Jose, Cambrian, a good part of Almaden, and then down through Evergreen, almost, well, down in the direction of Morgan Hill. That essentially was the district. The social unrest I talk about was mainly focused in East San Jose, although because of the Great Boycott, because of the war, because of frustration generally, the war on poverty, it was more than just an East San Jose issue. How did that pertain to me? How did that reflect me? What essence did that give to or what essentially created a political atmosphere for me is the fact that I lived in the outskirts of San Jose in my early years. I later moved with my family out to the country, in quotes, out to McKean, Toyon, and that area. Began a real rural ranch life. Attended schools, the elementary school, which was the only elementary school in the Elm Rock area, the Elm Rock Elementary School, Palace School, and I had an association with kids from the main east side, the essential east side area, Mayfair area, for example, and even going back to those elementary school days when I ran for office, much of that cropped up, much of that was familiar enough to me, and their concerns and their uneasiness about government and their distrust of government was in my mind and heart, and and of course those associations along with that helped me even at going back to that level. My family was an agricultural family, well known across the east side, and each and every one of them had in their respective dynamos, their respective areas of activity, strong reputations and highly regarded feelings among the community in their own right. That all helped. And my first campaign, as a matter of fact, was against a 16-year incumbent that seemed to most people far beyond in any way being challenged or defeated. I filed at the very last minute on filing date, kind of a story in and of itself that really sets the stage for some of what I've already said and what I may say as we move further along here. I had a good friend who was a journalist. He owned or was editor of the Mayfair, the East San Jose newspaper at that time. It was a weekly, Floyd Carlson, who visited me from time to time. By that time, the family itself was trying to transition from ag and the higher property taxes to and a willingness to stay here and farm, trying to stay economically viable. And we were doing some development at the time, and Floyd became a good friend, kind of hung out at my office, and from day to day would suggest that I run against Big Sam, 16-year incumbent. It would have been, and it was, the first time in the history of Santa Clara, second time in the history of Santa Clara County that an incumbent was defeated. There was one incumbent defeated prior to that. It was a very much more subtle and low-key race. It was a very, very competitive race. As I say, there were some people who wondered whether I fully understand understood what I was involved with. It still ranks, I'm sure, as one of the most competitive political campaigns in the history of the county. We prevailed. We prevailed because I had family, I had friends, and we worked hard. Also prevailed because the atmosphere out in the community was such that there was frustration. We felt strong underrepresentation in the east side. The war on poverty, which I already mentioned, the affirmative action question, and the unrepresented farm workers were all issues during that campaign. As a matter of fact, was against a 16-year incumbent that seemed to most people far beyond in any way being challenged or defeated. I filed at the very last minute on filing date, kind of a story in and of itself that really sets the stage for some of what I've already said and what I may say as we move further along here. I had a good friend who was a journalist. He owned or was editor of the Mayfair of the East San Jose newspaper at that time. It was a weekly, Floyd Carlson, who visited me from time to time. By that time, the family itself was trying to transition from ag and the higher property taxes to and a willingness to stay here and farm, trying to stay economically viable. And we were doing some development at the time, and Floyd became a good friend, kind of hung out at my office, and from day to day would suggest that I run against Big Sam, 16-year incumbent. It would have been, and it was, the first time in the history of Santa Clara, second time in the history of Santa Clara County that an incumbent was defeated. There was one incumbent defeated prior to that. It was a very much more subtle and low-key race. It was a very, very competitive race. As I say, there were some people who wondered whether I fully understood what I was involved with. It still ranks, I'm sure, as one of the most competitive political campaigns in the history of the county. We prevailed. We prevailed because I had family, I had friends, and we worked hard. Also prevailed because the atmosphere out in the community was such that there was frustration. We felt strong underrepresentation in the east side. The war on poverty, which I already mentioned, the affirmative action question, and the unrepresented farm workers were all issues during that campaign. Went down to the registrar's office 5 minutes before filing closed. The door was locked. I knocked on the door. The registrar, George Mann, came to the door, said, "We're closed." I said, "George, it says 5 minutes to 5 up there on that clock." He allowed me to come in. I filed, and of all things, Harry Farrell, who was a very highly regarded journalist at the time, political writer for a local newspaper, was doing his wrap-up, and Harry came around the counter and did what most people thought that Harry would never do in his life. He put his arm around me and said, "Hey kid, what are you running for?" I said, "I'm running the 2nd District against Sam." And the next day, the first of a lot of similar publicity and stories and media coverage began. Almost a third of a page story saying, "Surprise, Sam gets a candidate. Sam gets opposition." When I first ran for office, when I first ran for the Board of Supervisors, my literature and campaign name was Don, D-O-N. It actually became an issue in my first or second campaign. I was accused of trying to anglicize, would you believe, my name. But D-O-N was a family name, and everyone in my family from whatever age knows me within the family as Don. So if you see my literature around going way back to then, and you see "Re-elect Don," and then surrounded by family, you'll know exactly why. I was elected, first elected in 1968. My first term, of course, began in 1969, and I was on the board for 12 years, from 1969 through 1980. In 1980, I was elected to the state legislature. To illustrate the period of time that we were in and the atmosphere at the time, we were going from urban, or correction, we were going from agricultural to urban, and we were experiencing a tremendous transition period. The old Valley of the Heart's Delight, which I had grown up in, was fading away. A valley that was renowned for agricultural produce, and from time to time made to believe or advertised as a valley that could support the entire world in terms of agricultural produce. So we went from a worldwide reputation as a Valley of the Heart's Delight, as a producer of agricultural products, to the Valley of High Tech, or Silicon Valley as it's currently known. That was happening exactly at the time that I was running for office, and during, of course, almost a full term of my office. We had agricultural zoning, the so-called greenbelt zoning. It wasn't working. The area was growing up around us. The entire Bay Area was in a growth mode. The city of San Jose was pushing its boundaries in every direction. We, over a period of time, developed 15 cities. To illustrate the period of time that we were in and the atmosphere at the time, we were going from urban, or correction, we were going from agricultural to urban, and we were experiencing a tremendous transition period. The old Valley of the Heart's Delight, which I had grown up in, was fading away. A valley that was renowned for agricultural produce, and from time to time made to believe or advertised as a valley that could support the entire world in terms of agricultural produce. So we went from a worldwide reputation as a Valley of the Heart's Delight, as a producer of agricultural products, to the Valley of High Tech, or Silicon Valley as it's currently known. That was happening exactly at the time that I was running for office, and during, of course, almost a full term of my office. We had agricultural zoning, the so-called greenbelt zoning. It wasn't working. The area was growing up around us. The entire Bay Area was in a growth mode. The city of San Jose was pushing its boundaries in every direction. We, over a period of time, developed 15 cities. And my first assignments on the board were the Economic Opportunity Commission, which was dealing with the war on poverty. I remember my first meetings lasting through the night and driving home at sunrise, to the Local Agency Formation Commission, LAFCO, which I served on during my entire tenure. I served on LAFCO not only locally, but on a state level. At one point, we here in Santa Clara County, myself, a county council and a local city councilman, formed what is now called, and it still exists, is now called was called then, is now called the Association of California LAFCOs. But we actually formulated that here in Santa Clara County, created the incorporation and the bylaws. That goes on. LAFCO, of course, deals with all city boundaries, annexations, de-annexations, boundary adjustments, and you name it. Very important here in Santa Clara County. As we went from regionalism, as we went from local county control or direct control to regionalism, it was important that two of us serve on LAFCO on a 5-member board. I believe that board now is 7 members as a result of legislation I carried later in Sacramento. The board itself was an activist board, or became an activist board. Mind you, what we know now as unionization or county bargaining units didn't exist. The county employees were an association. And it wasn't long after I was elected, along with another new member from North County, it wasn't long after that the association was allowed to develop bargaining units, and that, of course, evolved into what we have today in terms of county unionization among employees. And as a matter of fact, it was actually prohibited under the charter. The Santa Clara County Charter prohibited county employees from participating in political activities, contrary to federal law. And as a matter of fact, it became an issue in my first campaign. I recall a very lengthy local newspaper article saying that I wasn't entitled to serve because I had actually gone out and sought the help of county employees. There was a lawsuit pending at the time. Within a day or two after I was elected, I was subpoenaed to come into court. I sat in the courtroom for just a very short period of time. The judge dismissed me and later ruled in favor of the employees. That was a big event in terms of labor law and labor activities. We created, for example, the Commission on the Status of Women. We created the Human Relations Commission. We created the Commission on Drug Abuse and Alcoholism. And did I point out the status of women? I guess I did. But anyway, those are the things that we were concerned about. Social issues, affirmative action. We put into place a provision whereby, for example, the sheriff in the sheriff's office could do what we call selective certification, and the sheriff could actually go down the list of eligible candidates and suggest individuals from minority groups. We actually created what we call the Santa Clara Plan at one time and entered into affirmative action commitments from various outstanding local businesses, local industries. Probably recall we had an employee strike, the first and only employee strike in the history of the county. And oddly enough, the argument and debate was over whether, to what extent we were going to raise salaries, not to what percentage or extent we were going to lower salaries. We finally settled, as I recall, at 7.5%. We actually had during that strike a counter strike where 1,000 employees at one point walked into the board chambers when 6 inches and I walked in and supported us in the stand that we were taking at the time. We were involved in 3 major elections. One was when I was chairing the board, and that was the election to create the Santa Clara County Transportation District, now called VTA. It was changed, by the way, to VTA when I was in the state legislature, that new terminology, Valley Transportation Authority. But originally it was Santa Clara County Transit District. We were desirous of creating a transit district coterminous with the boundaries of Santa Clara County. We needed to go to Sacramento, first of all, and get enabling legislation. Senator Alquist was a good friend of ours, carried the bill and enabled us via state law to go forward and create the district. But to create the district was on our backs because we needed to go to the voters and get voter approval. Ronald Reagan signed that bill. We had a very important bill signing, and very enjoyable, actually, bill signing. But again, the burden was on us to create the transit district. We hired professionals during the first run at creating the Santa Clara County Transit District, now the VTA, and we lost. It was decided that we'd go at it again within a year, and I chaired the transit. I chaired that election along with Vic Calvo from North County, and we prevailed in the second election. Before we did that, though, before we went to that vote, we went out to every city in the county during their formal sessions, day or night, and convinced every city in the county to join us in supporting that effort to create the new transit district. It worked. They went along with us. It wasn't only city councils and elected officials that we needed to satisfy. We then had to go out to every business and social group in the county and convince them, and we did, individually, collectively, went out and demonstrated that we needed modern transportation in this county, and the only way we were going to get it is if the voters approved it. They did. They finally approved by vote of the people, approved the creation of the district, and that wasn't it. That wasn't over. Then the real work began. It meant an extra day of work for us. We set aside, our regular meetings were taking place on Tuesday for our general agenda. We began to meet all day Monday to handle transportation matters alone. We needed to deal now with the existing transportation facilities in Santa Clara County. For example, San Jose City Lines had to be bought out or taken out. We had to get private transportation groups out. I remember one called the Peerless Lines. We had to get them out. We had to deal with the local taxi companies, would you believe. But anybody involved in transit or transportation at all had to be addressed, including the unions, of course. And from that moment on, we were dealing with ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, which had a very, very good contract up the peninsula with San Francisco and those people in that area. But that was a nitty-gritty. That was a work behind the scenes that a lot of people didn't see. We ventured into a program called Dial-A-Ride. And Dial-A-Ride was a program whereby, of course, you can merely call in and ask for a ride, ask for transportation. And we thought we had a system whereby we could handle those calls via some circular movement or direct or indirect movement throughout the county. The only problem is it didn't not work. It worked. It worked so well that we were getting 40,000 calls a day. This was during the early stages of computer science. Computers were, for all practical purposes, unknown and belonged to individuals. And we set up a facility for computer access, computer activity. Many of our computer operators had no knowledge or very limited knowledge as to how to operate a computer. Programs, of course, were far from being perfected. Any kind of computer hardware and software were new, I think, to even the manufacturers. But here we were with a great idea. As I say, worked, but it worked so well we couldn't handle it. We have some remnants of that. We have some outreach programs that still exist. We were getting tremendous opposition at one point. The local newspaper finally turned it on against us. Activist groups from across the country, and I won't even name those, came in to help stir the pot. And again, as I tried to point out earlier, it was frustration, within the community anyway, society-wise. The war, the farm laborers, the affirmative action. And here we are trying to embark on a program that no one had ever heard of before, and believed so much in it that it was finally turned down on a 4-to-1 vote. I voted against ending Dial-A-Ride, and that was at that time considered either a courageous or a very, very naive vote. We went to the voters for regional parks. The parks program still exists, and almost the same process that I described before. We put a small increment on the tax rate. In those days, we could raise revenue by merely increasing the tax rate. Proposition 13 ended that, of course. We went to the voters with a small increase in the tax rate, And that regional parks program still exists. The board has gone back to the voters a couple of times to get that reinstituted. But we were able to go out and purchase land in the outlying areas. I think we have a tremendous regional park system. Each board member participated very actively in securing for what he or she thought was would be the best regional park locations in his or her district or for the county generally. And you'll see Penitentiary Creek chain now, you'll see Cunningham, Lake Cunningham Park, the Grant Ranch, Almaden Quicksilver, and so forth. That program, as I pointed out, is still in effect, and we're very proud of that, and I'm very proud of the fact that the Santa Clara County voters and citizens of Santa Clara County approved it the first time, and they've continued to approve it. The first in Santa Clara County to venture out into the question as to whether we should have a sports arena in Santa Clara County. We actually put it on the ballot. The local newspaper was very supportive. Put it on the ballot as an advisory measure, no funding, no money involved, and it was approved, substantially approved for that type of an issue, but only advisory. Lo and behold, there were a couple of members of our board, it happened to turn out to be 3 members of our board, decided that we needed to go back to the voters to secure funding, rather than merely taking the advisory vote and saying, okay, we have it, we're going to proceed with it. We went back for funding and it was defeated. Just after that, the city of San Jose picked up the issue, kind of took it away from us, and hence you have the Santa Clara, the city of San Jose sports arena and the Sharks Pavilion, et cetera, et cetera. But that really originated. The Angela Davis trial was assigned to us because of an incident that took place in Marin County. The incident with regard to one of the judges being murdered up there. I was chairing the board at the time, and it was quite traumatic to hear that we were going to get the trial here. We were deluged with international press, and I recall the first press conference that was held over at the sheriff's office. The sheriff was Jim Gary at the time. We were sitting in a studio-type facility over at the sheriff's office, room filled with press. And the very first question came from a young woman journalist in the first row to Jim Gary, the sheriff. She said, "Sheriff, can a black communist woman get a fair trial in Santa Clara County?" And the sheriff nudged me and said, "The chairman of the board is going to answer that. Mr. Cortese is going to answer that." And out of a beautiful, clear blue, sent from vibes from good people surrounding me, I said, you know, anybody can get a fair trial in Santa Clara County. So, that first question, that opening of that conference, I think could have just put the whole future of that trial in chaos. During the 73-74 period of my tenure on the board, we had what was called the oil embargo. And that was a result of a war between Egypt and Israel. It was a result of OPEC interfering because of political maneuvering among in that part of the world. Oil prices, would you believe, per barrel, and this kind of relates to what's going on now in somewhat of a humorous way. Oil prices jumped from $3 a barrel to $5 a barrel to $15 a barrel. A recession was declared because of that. The Nixon administration said that the states, it was incumbent upon the states to impose conservation measures, including an increase, a tremendous increase in the consumption of fuel. There were other parts of that, including turning down your furnace and so forth and so on. During one of our board meetings, while that was going on, and again, this relates to the orders we received from the state of California. Jerry Brown, I believe, was the governor at the time. The order was that the counties were to manage this conservation measure, cut back on fuel. There wasn't enough fuel. Our oil reserves nationally weren't that great. And during one of the board meetings, kind of like we're doing here, just brainstorming and lamenting the fact that we had to impose what we call the odd-even program, so that you couldn't buy gas, you couldn't fuel up, couldn't go to a service station on a day that if your license number, I believe, began with or ended with an odd number, then you could go on that day. And then the other day, of course, was even. So it depended on your license, the odd-even numerical status of your license. And the other thing was that service stations would put out a red flag if they had no fuel at all, and a green. Well, naturally, you know what that led to. It led to, crashing the lines. It led to all kinds of frustration, just people becoming very furious and frustrated. As a matter of fact, we had difficulty at times walking into a supermarket because we were blamed for imposing this tremendous burden upon we put the odd even in. And we were responsible, in effect, for the fuel shortage. I believe gasoline at that time was only 30 or 40 cents a gallon. It jumped to $1.20. And as I say, in somewhat of a humorous way, or in some awesome or mind-boggling way, it relates, if you can even relate it to the current day situation. But anyway, during a board meeting, we were sitting like we are, and there was we were lamenting the fact that this was imposed upon us. And I looked over across the board. I was on far end, and I said, we should pass a resolution asking that the federal government nationalize the oil companies. And it passed unanimously. Dan McCorkle turned to me and said, "Is that a motion?" I said, "Yeah, it is." And of all things, we got the word out across the state to other cities and counties, and other jurisdictions, other cities and counties began to join in adopting this resolution. There was a great book out at the time. It was called The Seven Sisters that at certain points pursued that objective. At any rate, that created some real international attention. Not long after that, a call came in at home. I was working out in the backyard on a Saturday. A call came in from the White House. My wife ran out and said, "There's a note on the phone who says that somebody is calling from the White House and they want to talk to you." And she said, "Do you want to take it?" "No, I'm not sure." Finally, I'll go in and take it, and it was a call from the White House, and I believe it was Ann Wexler, who was working energy at that time. She wanted to come out to visit with us, and we held a small hearing here in Santa Clara County with regard to the energy situation generally. But that call, she also asked me if I would be willing to come meet with President Carter on that issue. And I did it, went back. It wasn't just a one-on-one meeting. There were 25 or 30 of us upstairs, in what could be the West Wing, I don't know, and had a very, very interesting interchange with the President of the United States, who became more focused on nuclear proliferation during that dialogue than he did on energy, the energy problem. But a little comment, across the board chambers or across the room of my colleagues to the effect that we should nationalize the oil companies led to all that. And you could imagine how the oil companies have felt about me ever since. I think we did a good job of addressing the questions of human relations, alcoholism, drug abuse at the time, the status of women, and so forth. I think I just have to say that we were on top of it, and we did much better when you consider what was going on across the country. And it wasn't just us; it was the people that we represented. It wasn't the fact that we were out there in front and prophetic in so many ways. I think we understood the pulse of the people, but the people themselves that would give us a progressive, sustained, safe community, irrespective of what was going on around in other parts of the country. There was a famous quote once that I really love. Somebody was asked what is the best type of government. What's the best type of government that exists throughout the world and throughout history? And the answer was the government that has the best people. And I think we've had the best people in Santa Clara County. In all honesty, I think we were blessed.